Yesterday, President Biden called the assault an act of sheer evil, his words, and renewed his vow to support Israel, saying there is no justification for terrorism. We're joined now by Republican Senator, that's Tim Scott of South Carolina. Senator Scott is a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. As you know, he is a 2024 presidential candidate. Senator Scott, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Gayle. It's good to be with you. It's really good to hear that Tony's family, I know he has a couple of kids in Israel.
Yes.
Thank God they're safe.
Yes.
Thank you, Senator.
We're following that story as well.
Yes, sir.
You know, President Biden told us yesterday that Americans are being held hostage. 20 Americans are missing. What, if anything, can you tell us about their status as we begin with you this morning?
Well, thank you, Gayle. One of the things that we should put in context for the American viewer is that 1,200 dead in Israel is like 40,000 killed in America. What we know without any question is that there cannot be a hint of daylight between us, the United States of America, and Israel as they respond to this attack. That is absolutely essential that they know we have their backs. We stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel, number one. Number two, we need to make sure that they have all the resources that they need. The good news, Gayle, is over the last 10 years, we've had a strong partnership with Israel and their military. So we know they have the resources, but there will be a desperate need as this pulls out and goes on. We will have to be in the position to refill some of the assets and resources that will be depleted along the way.
You know, Senator, I hear you saying there should be no daylight between the U.S. and our allies in Israel. And so I was surprised to read your comments about President Biden yesterday, maybe it was the day before. You said he had, quote, blood on his hands and was complicit, your words, with Iran because of unfrozen funds.
Yes.
That, I guess, in your view, led to this attack. Do you have evidence that there's a direct link with Iran and that the $6 billion was used?
Well, here's what we know without any question. Hamas thanked Iran for their support and their assistance. We know that for sure. We know that the president of Iran said without any question the $6 billion will be used any way we want. We also know, we can see it reinforced throughout the globe, that when there's weakness in the White House, there's blood in the streets. Whether that's in Ukraine, when President Biden said a small incursion might not be that big of a deal. When he said to Putin, if you cyber attack some areas, just don't cyber attack these areas. And frankly, when you negotiate and give $6 billion, you create a market for hostages. And the response to that has been Iran and Hamas working together without much of a question. 90% of the money that comes into Hamas comes from Iran.
Yeah. Senator, I'll just say that the White House's perspective on this is that none of that $6 billion has yet been used, so you can't blame that $6 billion for this attack. But I think the bigger question is more philosophical, and it goes to the question of unity and that united front. You're absolutely right that when America is divided and weak, it can embolden people abroad. With that in mind, why did you think it was a good idea at this early stage to make this comment about President Biden?
Well, there's no question. If you see that his weakness invited the attack, the negotiations funded the attack, and the first response from the White House, from the administration, was to tell Israel to stand down. It's that kind of activity that creates daylight. And if we go a step further, let's look back. The JCPOA was a disastrous nuclear deal that gave Iran an opportunity to see a runway to a nuclear weapon. We've seen that the advanced centrifuges have been more aggressively pursued than they have at any other time in recent history. There's not a question about Hamas working with Iran. The only question is how much intimacy was in that relationship. So I don't only stand by my comments, I would reinforce those comments that anytime we have weakness in the White House, there is blood in the streets.
Yes, Senator, we understand drawing lines, but there's also a difference between hard evidence. But I want to talk about funding. Congressional Republicans have been fighting funding for Ukraine for quite some time. Now, how do you feel about the support of combining the funding for Ukraine and also the support for Israel?
Well, there's no doubt that you may have heard some of the talking points from the White House. One of the things that they're looking at doing is combining funding from Ukraine to our border, which is an absolute crisis in our country. We now know that citizens or nationals from Yemen and Iran have crossed over our southern border, which means one of the most important things that we can do to fight perhaps a cell here at home is to close our southern border. Thank God that is finally common sense. We knew it as the American people. The government finally caught up. So combining funding with Ukraine, Iran, and the border is really important. And then, frankly, funding for Israel, actually taking back the $6 billion. It's one of the efforts I have. That's why I mentioned Iran. I would love to have the Secretary of the Treasury come in and talk about the importance and explain to us why was it so essential to release $6 billion to Iran, and is there a way for us to claw it back if those dollars are still in Qatar?
Senator, do you support U.S. military boots on the ground to help free the hostages, particularly the Americans?
There's no question that we've seen some flagships in the United States Navy move into the Mediterranean. That's a very important, good step that shows strength. I believe will be a great deterrent. Number two, having our special operation forces prepared to assist in the hostage negotiations and bringing those folks back without any question. We don't know how many Americans have been taken. We know there's 14 dead, 20 missing. We have no clue on how many hostages they have. But we do know that we must make sure that our firepower and our negotiation skills are in the region to help bring back those hostages safe.
All right, Senator Scott, thank you very much for joining us this morning, and thanks for the comments about my kids. They are safe, and I appreciate your concern. Come back soon.
Thank God. Yes, sir. Thank y'all.